Welcome and thank you for standing by. Currently, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the call over to your host for today, Erlene Dow.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the July Local Employment Dynamics, or LED webinar. Before I introduce today's speaker, let's go over a few housekeeping rules. As mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded. For your convenience, it will be uploaded to our Census Academy site with all supplemental materials relating to the webinar within 30 business days. We welcome your questions during the webinar. Please submit your questions using the Q&A panel, which is located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen. Once you've found the Q&A panel, make sure you choose all panelists from the drop-down. This will ensure we see your question. My colleague Tanja will be monitoring the Q&A panel. As time allows, we will answer your questions directly through the Q&A panel, or we will share your question with the presenter to respond during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Also, we ask that you do not include any personal or business identifiable information with your questions. We suggest keeping the chat panel open as we will provide key links and other resources throughout the webinar. Keep in mind, we won't be able to respond to the chat. That is for us to send out links and other resources related to the presentation. As you know, we are in a virtual environment and sometimes technical difficulties might occur. If you are having issues, try a different browser such as Chrome, or consider logging out and coming back into the session. If you are having audio issues, try selecting the computer audio or calling into the webinar via phone. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau and the LED Partnership, in collaboration with the Council for Community and Economic Research and the Labor Market Information Institute, it is my pleasure to welcome Camille Gilchriest as she presents Win Grants with the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics Origin Destination Employment Statistics, or LODES Data, Success Stories and Shortcuts from Texas's largest community college system. Winning grants is a foundational component of regional economic development initiatives, but it can be difficult to quickly craft compelling, data-driven narratives that respond to major funding opportunities. In this presentation, the Dallas College Labor Market Intelligence Center, or LMIC, will present case studies that showcase how to utilize LODES data to support a variety of economic development activities, such as campus planning, relationship building with external partners, and grant development from project design to post-award implementation. This presentation will also introduce the open source Python code base and SQLite database developed by the LMIC that facilitates rapid spatial analysis and visualizations of LODES data using arbitrary custom geographies. Camille Gilchriest is Director of GIS and Data Visualizations in the Dallas College LMIC. Her work has included quantifying the impact of evictions filings on students and their communities, helping Dallas College faculty, students, and staff understand the spatial arrangements of the Dallas-Fort Worth economy, and automating internal analysis workflows with Python. With that, I welcome Camille.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you again to the Census Bureau for the invitation to present some of this research. I hope that it's going to be really helpful for everyone. I'm going to kind of provide an overview real quick of the presentation. So I want to talk a little bit before I get into anything technical about kind of why Dallas College and community colleges, maybe in general, need to be thinking about labor market data and kind of what that means in our current environment. I also am going to talk a little bit about Dallas College and its place within the Dallas-Fort Worth economy. Most of that is going to be done using LODES data, and I think it's really helpful to kind of get a sense of the specifics of what we're dealing with as Dallas College. I am going to have a technical overview. I found that some people find that really boring, some people love it. So hopefully the technical overview will give you guys kind of an introduction to the code base and the kind of data structure that we're using to quickly analyze the LODES data. And then we're going to have some case studies. So there's 3 examples of how we're using this LODES data and our kind of technical stack to enhance campus planning, develop and implement grants, and really support community partnerships. So with that, let's start talking about labor market data and strategy in the community college context. So why is LMI so important for community colleges? So what we've really found, and I'll say we work a lot with workforce development. We found that there's kind of this dual tension that we face as a community college. We're supposed to support our nearby employers, and we're supposed to support our local workforce. And the question is, which activities can we conduct as a community college that supports both of these constituencies, both of these groups at the same time? And this slide here kind of reveals that tension, right? So, from the supporting employer perspective, right, a stronger employer base is going to help build our local tax revenues. A larger trained labor force can help those employers expand. Better training opportunities from the public sector can decrease the cost for employers to onboard new labor. And, a lot of employers really rely on public sector expenditures, either planned or current or historic, in their revenue models, right? So it's a huge part of these employers as they're developing their strategy, like what is the public sector doing? What are the education systems really doing in an area? And then finally, we found that a lot of employers, in like the business cycle is, a downturn, a lot of those employers are going to kind of be offsetting those shocks to the workforce and to the public sector, where we really have to step up and support workers or support employers as they're kind of dealing with tough economic conditions. Whereas supporting local workforce sometimes runs into a conflict, or I think tension really is the best word with employers, right? Obviously, it's beneficial to our local workforce for there to be higher wages, right? That increases community prosperity. It increases, what people are able to do. It gives them access to more resources. And then something that we're really trying to do with our local workforce is minimize the impact of those shocks in the business cycle. So a great example of this is retraining and maybe career changes, especially for those workers who have already been in a career for 5-10 years. Maybe that job that they were working is no longer relevant in the economy, right? We really have to step up and support workers in that situation. And our local workforce, people really desire open access to the best jobs with minimal kind of clawbacks on what those jobs offer. So it's one thing to have a great job, but it's another thing if your new wage is spent on housing or costly transportation. And then a lot of times our local workforce is dealing with some of the downsides of economic growth. So traffic, pollution, and if all of our public dollars are going to support business growth, but not going to public services, that can pose a problem for people who are unable to access jobs or kind of stuck in that middle ground. So why is LMI so important, right? We are trying to serve 2 constituencies that have a lot of overlap, but also a lot of different interests and in some cases, different values. So the LMIC, kind of what we originally set out to do from when we were founded in 2016 here at Dallas College was really align our academic programs with the labor market needs of employers. So essentially, we viewed economic opportunity as largely industry-led, with wages and working conditions kind of assumed and those standards set solely by industry. And we kind of were operating with this framework that community colleges really need to develop a reactive capability. So when an employer needs something, we're able to quickly jump in and kind of supply that. It also, this kind of approach really emphasized those large employers, right? So if we develop a training program for an employer, we're going to go for that employer that's filling 500 jobs per year rather than those employers that are filling 10 jobs per year. But what we found through doing this for a few years and kind of assessing the effects of it is that we needed a kind of different approach. So kind of building on that, we slightly shifted what we're focusing on. So we kind of found that the alignment work was pretty straightforward, right? It was pretty straightforward to tell, which jobs were important in the local economy. And we sort of found that program completion was just as important as making sure our programs were aligned. We also started to see that in a lot of cases, there wasn't really anyone calling the shots on economic development. And so we found, and this is kind of what we'll get into, is that a community college can be a leader in economic development And through that can really help set and enforce standards that a lot of employers are really eager to meet. A lot of employers want, to be supporting their workers, and they just don't know how to necessarily do that. We also kind of have shifted from this reactive capability to really understanding employer needs, but kind of making decisions with that in mind, but also based on a broader strategy that incorporates more than just the employers. And finally, we've really focused on extending our analysis to organizations and communities where the public sector can go further. So, whereas previously we were just focused on those large employers, now we're really trying to get a deeper understanding of who all is impacted by particular industries and their kind of development strategies. So I will go ahead and say the title was kind of clickbait. There's not a single shortcut that can kind of help you win grants using this LODES data. There's not, one type of analysis that, oh, every time we put this in a grant, we win. If we exclude it, we lose. No, it's not that simple. But when you have a kind of strategy as a community college or maybe other public sector organization, and when grant-funded workforce development is, one of those tactics within that strategy, the LODES data can be extremely helpful, and it's helpful in a lot of ways, and that's kind of what we're going to get into. Some of that is, telling your narrative, and it is including certain data points in actual grant writing, but it kind of goes before and after that to really cement your organization as a leader in workforce development. So I'm going to situate Dallas College within the Dallas-Fort Worth economy because I think this is going to be really helpful and kind of provide some context to those previous slides about our tension as an institution. So this is a map of the Dallas-Fort Worth area and kind of the 4 main counties in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So Dallas County is the oldest and kind of where city of Dallas is, but we're right next to Tarrant County, Denton County, and Collin County. And these 4 counties contain about 85% of the jobs in the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan statistical area. The GDP in Dallas-Fort Worth in 2022 was nearly $700 billion. So there's a lot of economic activity happening in these 4 counties. Dallas College, all of our facilities are in Dallas County proper. We have 19 total locations. We have 7 main campuses and 12 community campuses. So we have quite a big footprint within the county. And just as a comparison point, each of these counties has a community college system. So there's Collin College, Tarrant College, and then there's also our state technical colleges, which have kind of a statewide footprint, and there's some campuses in kind of the North Texas area. So Dallas-Fort Worth has experienced very rapid regional growth. Our primary jobs for all workers has grown from 2.3 million in 2002 all the way to 3.39 million in 2021. So that's about nearly 150% growth over about 20 years. So we've added about 1 million jobs in the last 20 years. And just as a point of reference for how big that is, that's like in adding all of New Mexico's labor force. The other example I had was it's like the size of the Cleveland metropolitan statistical area. So Dallas-Fort Worth has essentially grown by like a Cleveland in the last 20 years. So there's a lot of growth. You can kind of see from this chart, even the recession in 2008 and 2009 barely slowed things down in Dallas-Fort Worth. And that's kind of the important note as we are kind of thinking through economic resiliency in the region. We also kind of broke down the industry-specific growth patterns in Dallas-Fort Worth. So, especially looking at the last 10 years of available data, like where are these jobs located? And we classified them by the wage of the industry. And so this is an example of using LODES data. So this is coming from the resident area characteristics data. And we're kind of combining that with BLS data on wages. And what we found is that about 87%, so nearly 9 in 10 jobs, are in just 9 industries in Dallas-Fort Worth, right? And that's going to be professional scientific services, healthcare, transportation and warehousing, finance and insurance, construction, retail, administrative and waste management, waste remediation, accommodation and food services, and educational services. And when you classify these by kind of wages, you can see that a lot of these jobs are in medium and low wage industries, right? So there are, the bulk of the jobs are going to be in those medium and low wage industries. When we look at the kind of geographic dispersion of these jobs within the 4 counties, we see kind of yet another problem. If we look at those high wage jobs and we look at the share of those jobs, the share of the region's jobs within each county, we can see that the high wage jobs are going to Collin and Denton County, and they're not really going to Dallas and Tarrant County. So, since 2011, Collin County has increased their share of the region's high wage jobs by about 6%. So that's 6 percentage points, whereas Dallas County has dropped theirs by about 5 percentage points. So in actual numbers, there are 98,000 fewer high wage jobs in Dallas County now than there were in 2011, whereas in Collin County, there's 81,000 additional ones. And this is kind of true for all of the job types that we're seeing. So even if you look at all jobs, right, we're essentially seeing that Collin County and Denton County are growing faster than Dallas County and Tarrant County. And actually in 2021 was the first year since 2002 that less than 50% of the region's jobs were in Dallas County, down from a high of nearly 58% in 2002. So the economic growth in the region is dispersed, is broad. The other thing we're kind of seeing is that within those census tracts in Dallas County that have a high share of high wage jobs, so kind of along the x-axis here, that's the share of a census tract's jobs that are in high wage industries. In those census tracts that have a high percentage of high wage jobs, we're seeing a greater share of the workforce not living in Dallas County. Essentially what that means is that there is intra-regional competition for good jobs. So as the kind of share of jobs in a census tract becomes more focused on those high wage sectors, the share of the workforce that's working in those jobs that lives in the county is declining. And we checked this relationship over time, and the relationship is getting stronger with time. So even for those jobs that have remained in Dallas County, there's increasing intra-regional competition. When we look at kind of where these jobs have occurred, and this is a map, again, using the kind of comparison of 2 years of that RAC data from the LODES data set, we're seeing that a huge chunk of the jobs are in Southwest Collin County and Southeast Denton County. And we're seeing declines in kind of the traditional like center city of Dallas County, and we're seeing a lack of growth in kind of the southern and southwestern portions of the county. And we'll kind of go back to this geographic disconnect as we go through. So where does kind of Dallas College sit into this? What are our institutional numbers? How's our enrollment? Things like that. We are seeing what a lot of institutions are seeing, which is a kind of general decline in enrollment. So in academic year 2018, we had 170,000 unique students. By academic year 23, that was down to 122,000. So that's a drop of nearly 50,000 unique students at Dallas College. That's a drop of 15,000 credit students. It's about a 50% drop in transfer in enrollment. So this second chart on the right, which is kind of breaking this down by student type, we're seeing about a 50% decline in transfer enrollments and nearly a 50% decline in our continuing education enrollments as well. So we have certainly not avoided the kind of problem that a lot of institutions are facing, which is declining enrollments. What we have seen, which is maybe a bright spot, we have seen an increase of enrollment solely due to our dual credit program. So those are students who are currently in high school who are also completing programs to help them get a degree. And we have seen a growth in those programs of about 25%. So just as an example of kind of where that growth is occurring, using that same map of our 4 counties, a lot of that growth in our programs is coming from Northeast Dallas County, Southeast Dallas County, and even outside of the county to the east and to the south, right? So this is where our dual credit enrollment is growing. And so what is kind of the problem here? It's not precise. This is kind of a general map, right? But what we are seeing is a geographic disconnect, right? Our growth in enrollments are coming from areas that are distinct from those areas that are adding the most high wage jobs. This is a problem for us as Dallas College. We can prepare a student who lives in Southeast Dallas County for this great job. That job might be 60, 70 miles away within the same region. That job is not necessarily going to be accessible to that student. Additionally, the communities where those students live, where there aren't access to those high wage jobs, there could be, right, with the appropriate economic development program. And so one other thing to add, A lot of states have already adopted this, but in Texas recently we shifted to a kind of performance-based, our performance-based funding as an institution has shifted, where now community colleges receive additional funding based on completions in a particular set of in-demand fields that are determined at the state level by SIP program, so by the academic program. We do anticipate as an institution kind of seeing a somewhat of an increase in our funding through this kind of state funding model, but we don't know how this is going to play out in 5 or 10 years. And a lot of the programs that are relevant at the state level might not necessarily be relevant to any one particular municipality. So it's still helpful for us to have an internal understanding of what our local economy looks like. So in summary, kind of the reviews or the issues we're facing as an institution, we're seeing declining revenues from our traditional sources, which is just enrollment, and there's some uncertainty about our future sources of revenue. Because economic development within the region is kind of unplanned at a regional level, there's inequity in access to opportunity at kind of multiple scales. And we're seeing that while alignment of programming to the local labor market has been successful on paper, the devil is sort of in the details. And we're seeing issues, if you have a program, if only 10% of students are completing that program, how relevant is the alignment? This also kind of gives us opportunities, right? We're seeing massive amounts of investment in the DFW region and the rapid development of industries. So this is opportunity, right? If we can kind of respond to it and position our students well. There's also been a huge increase in availability of federal and state funds for programs that develop skilled workforce. So we see that the CHIPS Act, the IRA, there's also the New Skills Fund in Texas, which allows for employers to partner with community colleges to develop training programs. And there's also been kind of internal support within Dallas College for novel ways of approaching this kind of traditional problem of enrollment, particularly where we sit, which is in traditionally the more workforce or continuing education side of things. So I'm going to go ahead and get into a technical overview of how we're analyzing this LODES data. And I will try to go through this as simply as possible. So one of the issues that we ran into with the LODES data, that's as it's kind of delivered by the census, which by the way is amazing. We're talking about, like, let's say we're running a mile. The LODES team has run the first 2/3 of the mile. We're just talking about that last third here. So in no way a criticism of the data that's out there, just kind of the problems that we ran into. A lot of times we're trying to do time series analysis, or we're trying to analyze areas that aren't a census tract, right? We're trying to look at 5 miles from a kind of random point. And we've also found that kind of just exploring the files as CSVs can be sort of difficult, right? It's difficult to explore a spreadsheet without having quick access to data visualization. So in the non-technical language, what we sort of built as the Dallas College LMIC is a process to automatically download all of the LODES data for all years for kind of any given state and organize it into a standard coherent way. So think of this as organizing all your papers so you can find stuff easily. We then created a process for our analysts to quickly return a request into a usable output from the downloaded data. So let's say you're in a meeting and someone says, it would be really helpful if we knew how many workers came from this zip code. That can be a really difficult thing to do when you have 6 different meetings with 6 different people asking for 6 different zip codes. What we created were like a series of functions and pre-existing processes for our analysts to quickly get that data produced. And then the final thing we created was a set of templates that allow us to quickly create like charts and maps from the outputs of the previous steps. So we can deliver kind of a package of data for sort of any given area, any given set of years, really, really quickly. In a more technical language, right, we created a library that builds a data set, and we use SQLite, which is a database format that is really portable. So you can kind of load the whole database onto a thumb drive if you wanted to. We have a set of Python functions for analyzing the data. So you can format queries in a particular way to pull the LODES data in a particular way. And then we have a set of functions to visualize the data. So kind of getting a sense of how we sort of structured this. And so just as an example, let's say we're going to look at a random area in downtown Houston. We don't really do that much because we're up in Dallas. But if we wanted to do that right before what this would take, and we wanted to get at the raw data, we would have to download the geometry, which could take 20 minutes. We have to use the GIS software to identify blocks in a certain area. We have to record which blocks we're talking about that are in downtown. And then we have to download the LODES data file, organize it, filter those blocks. And then let's say we wanted to do this for every year from 2002 to 2021. Very quickly, we're getting into a very time-consuming and repetitive process. Doing this by hand introduces a lot of potential error. You make one typo and all of a sudden you're excluding some blocks and it kind of becomes a problem. But our current solution using our using our SQLite database and our pre-existing code, you can kind of do this in, really a few lines of code. And so I know code examples are not super helpful for a lot of the folks on this call. And we do have a GitHub repository that has all of the code that we used in there. So I will make sure that link is sent out when the slides are sent out, just so if you are interested in the technical side, you can kind of access and play around with this. But essentially, with just a few lines of code, you can pull the information you need for any given year and any given kind of subset of the LODES data. And this is a kind of graphic illustration of sort of how we're understanding this. So we have our LODES data set construction as kind of our first step. Then our second step is kind of using that built data set with our other data. So our internal student data, other census data products like the American Community Service, other labor market data like BLS data. And then we have our kind of analysis frame, right? So we've got our analysis of the LODES data, and we can kind of connect that to our other analysis or visualization pipelines. And then the output of this, of course, is our complete analysis, whether that's charts, tables, etc. And so this is a link to that actual GitHub page. So it's you can take a picture of that QR code and it'll link you. It's also, this is the GitHub link. I'm going to move on from this, but I'll make sure that folks get access to this, this link as we go forward. So we've discussed the strategy for why we're using this data. We've discussed the technical foundation. Let's talk about how we're actually applying this to specific grants and specific projects. So the first example I'm going to give is how we're using this LODES data in a grant that we recently received, a biotech development grant. So we received an EDA grant, about $9 million to train a biotech workforce in North Texas. In this example, Dallas College was kind of the lead convening organization. So we actually are helping to bring in employers, we're helping to bring in city economic development agencies, and we're bringing in other institutions, including four-year institutions. So this is really an example of Dallas College seeing an opportunity and having a strategy and having a vision and pursuing it. Some of this is based off traditional LMI, right? Where are good jobs in the local economy? They're in healthcare, they're in advanced manufacturing. But a lot of this is based on a specific diagnosis of the problems with kind of conventional industrial development in the Dallas-Fort Worth region, and an understanding that Dallas College can really be a leader in that. And this is a quote from Ben McGill, who's on our team at Dallas College, where he said the EDA was looking for something regional. They wanted to bring regions together. People don't pay attention to city lines anymore, and neither do companies. And so that narrative, right, based on what the grants were looking for, is something that we really emphasized both in meeting with our potential partners ahead of the grant and in the kind of implementation stage. So this is kind of an example of, again, this 4-county Dallas-Fort Worth area. There were sort of 3 sites that are kind of floated around for locating facilities related to this biotech grant. And the kind of colored, I don't know how to describe this, these kind of shapes are the commute distances. So these are 30-minute drives from each of these particular sites. One is in Collin County in Plano, one is in downtown in Pegasus Park, and one is in southern Dallas County in DeSoto. One of the problems we quickly ran into is that it's kind of natural for each of these cities and each of these areas to sort of compete against each other, right? When in fact, if we have a regional view and we kind of present a regional view, we can see that there's actually benefits from these areas working together and kind of each taking on a chunk of this project. So what we did is we were actually working closely with the city of DeSoto, which is a city in southern Dallas County, and we kind of developed these custom workforce areas, right? So these are in-house regions that we designed to kind of capture where employment centers really are. And essentially what we did was an analysis using the LODES origin destination data to show that there's a lot of overlap between the existing manufacturing workforce between this DeSoto site and this downtown Dallas site, right? So essentially what we're kind of making the argument for is that you don't have to crowd around this site to receive the same advantages of kind of a co-located manufacturing workforce. And so as you can see to this kind of table on the right, these are raw counts of where the manufacturing workforce came from that works in a particular zone. So this is something that we were able to do very quickly using this kind of LODES SQLite data set that we've built. And we were able to develop these geometries and then quickly query the data. And we were able to kind of look at this across years as well. I don't have the results of that in here. We have another example later that shows kind of how that looks. And just as a comparison, this is the same map, but looking at that design district or that downtown Dallas view, right? So there's a lot of overlap, especially in the kind of Grand Prairie, West Dallas, Southern Dallas areas of manufacturing workforce. So an employer in DeSoto can compete for the same workforce, right, that the employer located in that downtown spot can compete with. So this idea of a kind of regional approach, right, this is how we're using that LODES data to really illustrate that point, to say that, yes, there is already a regional overlap in labor force and where workers are commuting. So if we're really conscious about that, we can kind of spread around this economic development at real no cost to the employer, but in a way that benefits these smaller cities or these growing cities in Southern Dallas County. Another way we're using this data is to prioritize and kind of understand our campuses in kind of a new and maybe unique way. So going back to this kind of conflicting priorities thing, right? If we're looking at nearby employers, and let's say we develop a program for those employers, is that going to benefit the people who live near a particular facility? And the answer is we didn't really know before we did this research if that even made sense. And maybe in some cases, right, there's an overlap between a local neighborhood and working nearby. In some cases, that's not the case. So we started by looking at our South Dallas Training Center, which is located just east of downtown Dallas. We first started looking at students who attended courses in the South Dallas Training Center. Historically, where did they come from? And we found that only about 10% or so of students lived within 2 miles of the facility, and only about a quarter lived within 4 miles. So a lot of students were traveling from outside of the neighborhood, but for whatever reason, the program offered at this training center was the most convenient for them. And so this is something to kind of keep in mind. This map on the left is just simply showing where students came from within the county. So we're seeing actually a lot of people coming from Southern Dallas County and from kind of just outside this 4-mile band to take classes at this training center historically. When we look at the kind of local employment and workforce, the map on the left here is the workforce. So this is just, where are workers? There are, areas of high density near downtown, but what we're really seeing is a huge disconnect between a high density of workers and a high density of employment opportunities. So a lot of the nearby employment opportunities for the South Dallas Training Center are significantly east of the center. They're really not in the immediate neighborhood of this center. So when the question comes to us, well, we want to use the center to support local employers, the definition of local is really up for discussion, right? And so we do see that, if we're going to be focusing on those employers 2 to 4 miles away to the east, why wouldn't we also focus on programs, right, that could support employment in kind of the downtown core of Dallas, right? Because those are actually equidistant from the training center. So as we're thinking about this and talking about it, it's on some levels a challenge to our staff who are using this information to really think about what sort of economic opportunities we're locating at particular facilities. And it's also just providing information that helps us in our outreach. Just as an example of where local residents actually commute to from this training center, a lot of the workers are commuting, quite far to access employment, right? You have workers going all the way up into Collin County. You've got workers going into Southeast Dallas County. Over nearly 48.5% of the local workers who live within 2 miles of that training center don't actually work in Dallas County. So we're actually seeing a lot of workers who are not even remaining local for work, right? So when we talk about supporting the local workforce, sometimes the economic benefit is that accrues to employers is going to be accruing outside of Dallas County. We're normally totally fine with that, but it's something that we really have to think about. Are we going to say this is a support program for local employers if the employers that benefit are not those local employers? This is just another view of that data, right? And this is, again, the sort of visualization that we can produce really quickly using that, that sort of SQLite, spatial-lite framework. So we're really showing where those commutes are. And this map was really helpful for people to understand that a lot of the workers who are living near this facility are not actually working in close proximity and are traveling quite far to access employment. And just as an example for who works near this facility, this South Dallas Training Center, right, we've got folks coming from all over the place, right? We've got folks coming from South Dallas and East Dallas. What we are seeing is a generally more overlap between this map and where our students come from than the kind of previous map of where local residents work. And because of the kind of data set that we have, we can kind of compare the local employment base in different industries, right, to really visualize which industries would be supported by an employer-focused program versus a resident-focused program. And we can, again, kind of scale that up quickly to do the same sort of analysis for all of our campuses. So now we can compare campuses and develop a strategy that's really targeted for each particular area. So now when we start writing grants, we're not going into this with a strategy that works in northern Dallas County but doesn't work in southern Dallas County. We have the information to quickly focus on, okay, this sort of program makes sense at this campus, but not in this one. And so let me check my time here. Okay, got a few more minutes. So the last thing I really want to focus on, and this is also really helpful for grant developments, particularly when you're thinking up a project and you're trying to convene particular partners. And this is kind of providing a service to those partners to help them understand the economic challenges they might face. So we do a lot of LMI analysis for kind of small cities within the region. A lot of this is because those smaller cities don't necessarily have like access to political clout, right? Sometimes the bigger city has an easier time, getting the attention of the universities in the area or the regional chamber, whoever's normally producing research. So there's kind of high potential there for Dallas College to step in and say, well, we can help you with that analysis. And because it's a smaller city, right, there's the opportunity for a more transformative impact. And through these quick analyses using our infrastructure, we can really support those cities. So the city of Lancaster in southern Dallas County, it's grown a lot in recent years. There's an employment base of around 15 to 20,000 workers, and it has been growing, right? So whenever we show this to the city of Lancaster folks, they always say it's a huge underestimate because they have a lot more growth than they see reflected in these numbers. But what we built for them was an assessment of how their city ranks in terms of capturing their local workforce. So one of the things that the city of Lancaster does is they provide tax incentive to local companies. And if those companies can secure a certain number of Lancaster residents, that's one of the conditions of receiving the abatement. So what we sort of found is that looking back to 2002 and going all the way to 2021, we were really looking at where those residents of Lancaster work. And most of the residents of Lancaster, as a suburb of Dallas, are working in Dallas. And we've only seen that grow in recent years. So, the city of Lancaster has captured about 200 to 300 workers from the city of Lancaster. So, there's about 900 to 1,000 workers in Lancaster who live in Lancaster compared to, 600 or 700 maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But really, it's a lot of Lancaster residents are still commuting to Dallas, right? So this is really helpful information for city economic planners, economic development officials, as they're kind of developing these incentives and thinking about, what changes or what tweaks need to be made. This is kind of another view of the same data. I guess it's kind of the reverse view, right? So this is where the Lancaster workforce is coming from, right? So for people who do work in the city of Lancaster, where is their home residence, right? So again, we've seen the city of Lancaster really increase by a few hundred, close to 1,000 Lancaster residents work in Lancaster, but we've really seen that a lot of the jobs that are being created in Lancaster are actually going to Dallas residents, right? So in a huge way, the Lancaster tax base and those tax incentives are actually supporting employment in the city of Dallas. This isn't necessarily a problem, but again, it maybe raises the question of what sort of regional strategy could the city of Dallas and Lancaster pursue together? Could Dallas College be a helpful bridge between these two cities to kind of develop some sort of program that really, rather than creates competition, kind of emphasizes the opportunity here, right? So again, city of Dallas was sending about 1,500 workers to Lancaster 10 or 15 years ago. Now they're sending about 3,000 workers to Lancaster. And so again, all of this goes into really building a narrative for economic development and being able to use this LODES data to quickly analyze and produce visuals to sort of support regional efforts. The city of Lancaster is kind of part of a group of Southern Dallas County cities called the Best Southwest region. And we've done similar analyses for the Best Southwest region, right? That really helps pitch this kind of regional approach, right? Instead of Lancaster versus Dallas versus DeSoto, right? We're really saying as Dallas College, we support all of these cities and we support cooperation to really ensure that the economic opportunities make sense for the region, not just one individual city. So I will go ahead and stop there. I think I kept it pretty close to, yeah, about 35 minutes. I just wanted to thank the two folks on my team who really helped with this work, our senior director, Dr. Tana Hicks, as well as Amar Nanjiani, who's our assistant director, who really helped a lot with organizing the code base and making it really legible. So I will stop there and guess we can use the rest of the time for questions. Thank you everyone for your time and attention.
The presentation will be accessible on the Census website at census.gov Academy under the webinar tab in a couple of weeks. The link has been provided in the chat. Again, please type all of your questions in the Q&A and keep your questions pertaining to the presentation. The chat has been disabled to our attendees. For the first question, what do you define as high wage and as low wage job?
That's a great question. Okay, I'm going to scroll really quickly to those slides. So this might make people car sick or seasick or something. So hold on one second, because I know I have it in here. I believe it's, let me just go back before I start speaking. I know we're almost there. Okay, so our low wage industries are averaging $65,000 or less per job. Medium wage is 65 to 95, and high wage is greater than 95. Industry level wage data is tricky. It's usually like total workers, or it's like the denominator. You know what, let me just put it this way. You take the total wages paid and you divide it by the total number of workers, right? So it can be kind of tricky and doesn't necessarily match up to specific occupation level data, but that's what we used. So 65,000, 65 to 95, and greater than 95.
Next question. Are there also areas where the interests of supporting nearby employers and supporting the local workforce are not in tension?
I will say yes. I think there are some cases where it's a great match and some cases where it's not. And that's just kind of the reality of it. I think exploring the tension, I hope this was maybe illustrated as the presentation went on. I think exploring the tension is really useful.
Question. How does Dallas-Fort Worth data compare to the other three major cities, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin in Texas?
That is a great question and definitely something to kind of dig into in the future. Dallas-Fort Worth is it's like the largest metro area, but Houston, the city of Houston is larger. Austin and San Antonio are both a bit smaller, and I imagine they have pretty different breakdowns of the industry breakdown, particularly Austin. But yeah, that sounds like a great future presentation.
The comment, total job growth seems to be 43% instead of 143%. Okay.
Cool.
Next question. Do you use data from residence area, excuse me, let me start again. Do you use data from residence area characteristics or workplace area characteristics when you mention the local job, location of the job or job growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it really depends on what you're trying to say or what you're trying to assess. So if we're talking about kind of the growth in the workforce, always use the residence area characteristics. If we're talking about where the jobs are being added, we use that workplace area characteristics. So I kind of switch between the two, but generally for most of these population numbers, especially in these first few slides, I was using the resident area characteristics.
Next one's a comment. Went too quickly to take the shot of the QR. Hopefully the GitHub link will be in the presentation later. Okay. Next question. Could you share the link to the GitHub page in the chat?
I went ahead and did that.
Oh, you did that? Okay, thank you.
Um,
Thank you very
Camille,
much.
can you put it on your last slide too, so that they can see the QR code, please?
Yes. Oops.
And there is also a question for your contact information, which is currently on the slide that's being displayed. And next question, how can we access to LODES for our respective counties?
That's a great question. Most of the data is provided from the Census Bureau at the state level. So downloading that state level data, at least in our kind of workflow and how we're building this out, we're accessing counties from within a particular state, and the code to build a database for your state that's on the GitHub page, you can swap out the states. You can use kind of any state you like. So I would say, at least using this approach, it's based on the state and then the county within there.
I also added a link to the raw data in the chat.
What was the process of building the code to support your analysis? And did you handle that completely in-house? What does the output from the tool look like for a planner accessing the data?
Those are two great questions. So the first part of that question, the process of building the code and developing it in-house, we did develop it in-house. The process looked like getting the same requests and having the same problems over and over again and thinking there's got to be a faster way to solve this and for these repetitive questions. So it really took shape over probably a couple of years of using the data in that kind of slower fashion that I discussed. And then what does the output from your tool look like for a planner accessing the information? So I have I don't necessarily want to get us back too much into the technical stuff. Essentially, the code, the output of the code are kind of pandas data frames, if you're at all familiar with the technical side of things. So imagine a spreadsheet that's kind of held in the memory of your computer. That's kind of what the output looks like. And it's querying a database using SQL commands. So you're essentially asking the database a question and it's returning that kind of spreadsheet in memory. And then from there, you can connect it to other data or make charts with it or things like that. Or if you want to save it as an actual spreadsheet, right, you can do that. But most of this is handled through like a Python environment, a Python interpreter.
How do you find the people to participate in the programs?
That's also a great question. We have a lot of ways that we do that. Dallas College has a full marketing department that does kind of constant outreach and constant advertising about programs we have available. And we have really long-standing relationships with school districts. So there's just a lot of awareness that Dallas College is a place you can go for workforce programs. And we have like a community engagement team that does direct outreach with community organizations in particular areas. There's a lot of ways that we find students, and it's definitely a priority to continue expanding that. I know one thing that's been explored more recently is specifically trying to find folks in jobs that could benefit from upskilling. So that's, finding finding particular employers and reaching out to their employees through the employer to say, like, hey, we've got this upskilling opportunity. So kind of a range of approaches.
Have these processes and activities been tied into workforce development and training opportunities? Said differently, how many potential employees are trained to do this in the place of employment to increase relevant data where they are?
So that is a great question, and I don't know the answer. I think we have tried to, we're kind of in the, right, if we're looking at a study, we're like, well, before it was this way and after it was this way, what were the results? We're just now getting to that after portion where things have changed and we don't have the results yet. So great question. And I think we're still waiting to see if anything that we're doing affects the data at an underlying level and if we can see that in the LODES data itself.
By any chance, which is the percentage of workers coming from other states or from other counties that are part of these total workers by industry? The demand for high school workers in this region has prompted this trend.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we didn't talk about it much in this presentation, but one of the great advantages of the LODES data is that you can actually see workers that are coming from out of state and live out of state to fill jobs. You can also see workers that are coming. I mean, some people have really long commutes, right? Some people live 100 miles from where their job is located. So you can see that in the LODES data. So I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but I think that's a great question, and it is answerable with the LODES data.
Throughout your presentation, you focused on workforce. What are other factors you would consider from an industry investment point?
That's a great question. I think when we have talked with industry, they're really looking at their perspective is, okay, if we locate a facility here, can we get enough workers, right? So they're like, we want, within 30 minutes, how many workers have this skill set? The LODES data can be useful for that. So if you want to say like how many workers in a particular industry live within 30 minutes, but generally they're looking for something really specific. They're like, we are going to build a call center. We need 50 people who are trained in working in a call center. How many people with this skill set live within 30 minutes, right? So what we've seen from the industry perspective is like a way more specific question that you can somewhat answer with the LODES data. And I think also we've done a lot of work with site selectors where we're kind of having a back and forth where they're presenting their data and we're kind of presenting ours and being like, we see some disagreement. Let's talk about what that actually means. And so a lot of it is kind of educating industry on other perspectives and other types of data that exist to help them make those location decisions.
What was the process of building the code to support your analysis? And did you handle it completely in-house? What is the output from the tool you look like from a planner's accessing information? Oh, I think I just answered that question, didn't I? Okay, sorry about that. Next question. Is the data also available on the map?
Yes, it is. And I want to be very clear that a lot of the things that I'm showing in this presentation are things that you can do with on the map. And the reason we built this out is we wanted more flexibility and we wanted something that's like reproducible and automated. So if you have one quick question or a few quick questions, you can use on the map, and it's a great tool. It's interactive. You can kind of click through it and it's awesome. So a lot of this can be done using on the map, but some of the things that we're doing, like analyzing kind of arbitrary geographies or taking the raw data and producing custom visualizations for 30 areas at once is more difficult to do with on the map. So that's really where this is kind of like, and I want to emphasize this, the LODES team has done like 95% of the work here. This is kind of like the final part that I think I said 2/3 earlier, but it really is more like 95% of the work, and this is just additional.
Thank you for putting the code out there. That's a comment. So do your planners have a GUI or DUI interface that they see?
So we mostly use VS Code. So there is like a somewhat interactive, I mean, yeah, there is a sort of GUI interface, but it's not a full-fledged program that you could like double click on your desktop and it opens this great window. All of our planners are writing code to interact with this data.
What is Python?
And Python is just the programming language that we're using to kind of query the data and analyze it. So it's just a computer programming language.
You also work with registered apprenticeship.
That question kind of cut off. Do you mind repeating it?
Sure. Do you also work with registered apprenticeship programs?
Yes, we do. That's definitely an area of growth that Dallas College is exploring. I think compared to like some regions have, especially like in the Northeast or even in the Midwest, there's a really strong apprenticeship culture programs. I think in Dallas, it's less developed. So I think Dallas College is definitely interested in expanding that, but we do work with, just to be very clear, we do work with registered apprenticeship programs.
Next one's a comment. Thank you. This is an amazing upskilling opportunity, and it may be tied to BEAD and digital inclusion training. You've answered a question already about what is Python. The second question about Python, is it proprietary?
So Python is free and open source as a programming language. So it's not proprietary. And essentially what this is kind of like, it's like so it's like a recipe, right? So if you're cooking something, Python is like the language the recipe is in, and then what this set of data is the recipe itself that you follow to get a certain output. And it's available for free the way that we're using it on our GitHub site. So none of this is proprietary.
Is the tool that your planners use to access and analyze the data public, and can you share it?
Yep, it is public and it's available. The main tool that we're using is just this code base at the GitHub. And then if you want to use the particular interface that we use is VS Code, which is a free software from, is it Microsoft? I think it's Microsoft. VS Code is the name of that though, and it's free as well.
How do you handle cross-state commuting?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not something that we have spent a whole lot of time on because we're so focused on the workforce within Dallas County and that particular perspective. But something that we're noting, especially, one of the federal programs that we've been working with is through the CHIPS Act, and the program, or the main semiconductor company in North Texas is Texas Instruments. Their facility is kind of really close to the border with Oklahoma. So we are actively working on how we handle cross-state commuting in our analysis of local labor markets. But we don't have an exact way of doing that yet, although I know the LODES data has that capability.
Did you use business analysis and Pro?
So I think that's talking about the Esri ArcGIS products, Business Analyst and ArcGIS Pro. In these maps that we presented, everything was done in Python directly, so we're not using Business Analyst or ArcGIS Pro. However, if you are using those softwares, this approach and this method, you can save the data into formats that are usable within Business Analyst and Pro. And I think Business Analyst, again, I don't know that product super well, but I think they have a similar functionality where you can analyze around arbitrary points. So I think it's possible to interact this data with the business analyst data.
Have you identified DE students doing CTS programs?
I'm guessing CTS, I don't know what DE is. I think CTS is continuing and technical studies, but unfortunately, I don't know what DE is. Unfortunately, sorry.
The rest are comments. Someone says it can be downloaded from Anaconda. I'm not sure which program they're referring to. Thank you. This was a very informative program. Oh, CTE is Carrot Technical Education. CTE, yeah.
Yeah, I think to that one, have we identified students doing CTE programs?
Right. Yes.
I don't totally understand the question. I'm sorry.
Well, that is the end of our questions for today. And I
There
turn it
is
back.
one more question, so sorry, in the chat.
Okay, I see it. Thank you. How can we get resources to open workforce development training for high school graduates in cities?
That's a great question. This is not totally my area of expertise, but I would say reach out to your local community college would be a great place to start. And if you don't have a local community college, look for your state's workforce board. So I know in Texas, it's called Texas Workforce Solutions. Those will be your two main kind of public sector areas that are running those sort of programs. So I would say local community college or a local workforce board. And in Texas, that would be the Texas Workforce Solutions. I'm sure it's different in different states.
Thank you. That includes our Q&A session right now. And I turn the mic back over to Erlene.
Thank you, Tanja. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. And thank you to Camille for her outstanding presentation. We had some really great questions like our audience always does. So I really appreciate that. Camille.
Yes.
We lost Erlene. Camille, are there any closing remarks that you'd like to say before we close out for the day?
I would just like to say if anyone has any questions, feel free to send me an email. I'm glad to help to the extent that I can in terms of getting people acquainted with the data and the approach that we're using. Yeah, and I just hope this was helpful for everyone. Thank you all for your time.
Hi there. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so sorry. I was just telling the audience how great of questions they had too, and thanking Camille as well.
This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.